me, and with this, I will start. I look at this as a bit of an introduction about Lebanon with a focus on its conflict on its sectarian conflicts. I think in order to understand why Lebanon has been through so many sectarian conflicts, starting from the 17th century onward and even before, I think we need to have to focus on one very important aspect of Lebanon, which is its geography. If you look at the map of the Middle East, you will notice that in this great green area, limited by two great river basins, the Mesopotamia and the Nile basin, it's flat. And the only small part that has some mountains is in this small little area. And you know, when you are a small persecuted minority, staying in this large semi-arid or in the basins is pretty dangerous to yourself. So people started getting and running away from danger and becoming refugees in the mountains of Lebanon. And this is what started Lebanon as a place where refugees from all over the world come and hide. I'm not going to say all over the world, but all over the Mediterranean or the ancient world come and hide. For example, nowadays in Lebanon, we have almost 18 different sects, and we have 3 or 4 different ethnicities. In our region, there have been so many ethnic conflict, ethnic cleansing, genocide, that to name them, it would take me more than the allotted time for this small brief on over Lebanon. We can go as far back as the Armenian. We had Kurds. Recently, with ISIS in Syria and Iraq, we had waves of refugee of Yazidis. We had Palestinians. The Maronite, who became at one point the largest group in Lebanon, were also refugees who came from northern Syria. The Druze, who came from Egypt. So it's a land of refuge. What makes it even more of a land of refuge is usually mountains have raw materials. So this entices different big armies or big empires to come and overtake them. Fortunately, or I don't know, maybe unfortunately, Lebanon has no raw materials as is iron, gold, diamonds, or what so. And the Lebanese mountains are very high. We're talking about 3,000 kilometers or 2,000 miles. They have snow. They are very hard to navigate. So it's a perfect refuge place. And with this very important aspect, you start understanding why Lebanon is such a mosaic of different people, different ethnicities, different sects. And when you have such a large and different group of people, tensions start rising. And with this, you can start understanding why we had so many ethnic conflict. If you add one more aspect to that, if you notice in the map, you have these 2 large basins. And throughout history, there was always 2 big empires that were in Mesopotamia or in the Nile. And Lebanon was always, if you want, the no man's land that everybody was fighting or to get to the other side or to make it as a stronghold in order to become stronger or be able to conquer other lands. So this additional aspect made it another reason why it was a land of sectarian conflict. Of course, you also could add the geographic position and more recently the whole Israeli problem. I look at this as a very interactive seminar. So at any time, please don't hesitate to ask me questions or if you need any further information. Uh, I like to just go off for 2 minutes on one of the few, if you want, empires that grew in Lebanon and became a regional player, which are the Phoenicians. We're talking about 1000 years BC. I'm not going to go on them for a long time. It's just what interests me is they were able to grow using the cedar tree, which enabled them to build very strong boats, and they were able to colonize most of the Mediterranean. And at one point, they were almost went head to head with the Roman Empire, the early Roman Empire. And I don't know if you heard about General Hannibal, who almost took over Rome. But what's interesting about the Phoenician, and this will shed even more light on the modern history of Lebanon, is that when you ask a Phoenician person, who are you? He would say his name, Baal ibn Melkart, for example. And you will ask him, where do you come from? He would say, from the city of Tyre or the city of Sidon, where I am now. This is directly from there. But he would stop at that. They didn't have a national identity. If you ask at the same time, historical time, if you ask a Greek, who are you? He would say, I'm Alfonso or something, or a Greek name. Where do you come from? He would say, I come from Athens or from Sparta. And then he would say, I am Greek. They had a national identity. The Phoenician didn't have a national identity. They only had a regional or a city state identity. And this stayed with the people who live in this region, in this small part of the land, if you look at this map. And nowadays, it's no longer city-states, it's sects. And this is one of the problems. Building a common national identity have been one of the most important challenges faced by the Lebanese government or the Lebanese modern state, to be able to have a national identity that will get all their population around it, rather than being beholden to their sectarian zaims. Zaims is an Arabic word or a Lebanese word that means, I'm not going to go use a term of the mafia, but it's more of a godfather term. You know, he's our head of the family, head of different families. So with these 2 or 3 different aspects, you can start understanding why Lebanon has suffered from such sectarian conflict. Just take as an interesting note, all these conquerors and settlers have passed through Lebanon. You have Alexander the Great, the Roman Empire, Byzantium and Persia, who also fought, and Lebanon was a land they fought over. You had Islam that started in what is now Saudi Arabia and spread. We had also the Mongols, we had Crusaders, and we had the Mamluks, and then we had 400 years of Ottoman control. And this is where, if you want, the modern history of Lebanon can really start. And this is where the basis of the modern sectarian system in Lebanon also was put in place. At one point, the Ottoman created what we call the millet system, which is allowing the different religious groups their own independence, what concern family laws and their religious tradition, marriage, divorce, how they bury their dead. And this allowing the religious leaders control over their own population, started growing the seeds that will later on erupt in a civil strife between the different Lebanese groups. In Lebanon, as I told you, we have 18 different sects. It's 19 because the constitution allows for the non-believers to have a civil sect, if you want. you have we can break them into two. You have the Muslims on one side, the Christian on one side, and you can further break them. For example, in the Muslims, you have the Druze, you have the Shia, you have the Sunni, you have the Alawites. On the Christian part, you have many more. You have the Catholics, you have Protestant, you have Armenian Catholic, Protestant. Catholic Armenian and Protestant Armenian. You have the Orthodox, the Eastern Church, you have the Western Church. There's at least 13 or 14 different Christian sects. Again, most of them were refugees who came to hide from their oppressors in the whole Middle East in these nice green mountains. The two figures that made Lebanon what it is are Amir Fakhreddin and Amir Bashir. What's interesting about them, again, I'm going over 3,000 years of history in 5 minutes, but I think it's really interesting and important to better understand why Lebanon has been suffering for the last 100 years of constant ethnic or sectarian civil wars. What's interesting about these two is that they started as Druze emirs, but when the demography in Lebanon, and this is another aspect that is very important, that will play a very important role in all the biggest civil wars, is the demography. At several points in the history of Lebanon, you had a sect who had the majority, demographical majority, and they controlled. But then for different reasons, and it depends on which sect, they started losing their majority, and another sect started. In the middle 15th, 16th century, it was the Druze. The Druze are Muslims, an offshoot of Shiism. They were a closed religion. They were the majority. They were a warlike sect, very strong, and they controlled the mountains. Meanwhile, they started becoming smaller and smaller in numbers, while the Maronites started growing in numbers. So you started having these tensions. These pictures are Fakhreddin, and you have Amir Bashir II. What's interesting is Amir Bashir II started as a Druze/Sunni, but when the demographical tide started moving away, the Shihabi family, the leaders, the Umara is a word for princes of Lebanon, they switched the religion from Druzeism into Maronite. And this shows you how important demography is for Lebanon. So at one point, we start going into the 19th century, and this tension between the Druze and the Maronite has been growing. The Druze, although they were the princes, they were controlling the country, but not Lebanon, but Mount Lebanon, which is a part of Lebanon. You can see it in this map. It's the light and the darker gray. When the demography started changing, the Maronite wanted more control, and this is where the first civil war, if you want, the sectarian civil war started in Lebanon. It was in 1860. We are talking about Mount Lebanon at the time held around 300,000 inhabitants. At least 10 to 15% of them were killed, massacred. It was a victory for the Druze, but as everything in Lebanon, paradoxically, it sounded the end of their control of the country. This is where the Ottoman Empire was starting to get weaker and weaker, and we started having direct foreign intervention and control of Lebanon. The French, the English, the Russian started interfering. And the first solution to end these early sectarian civil wars just after 1860 was to divide the country into two. Northern part for the Maronites, southern part for the Druze. And this is the start of a trend of the European to draw maps and to cut countries into different shapes based on non-existent geography. Of course, on the land, in reality, if you see this map, the two Makmiyat, you will see that the land is not ethnically or sectarianly clean. There were regions that had mixed population, and what this division did was to foster even more tension. And we kept having these small civil strife. So, as another solution, again, the European met 7 countries with the Ottoman Empire, and they decided to further to subdivide Mount Lebanon into smaller districts and allow for common sectarian ruling. And it is in these divisions that you had the basis of Lebanon's sectarian power sharing consociational system were let down. You had the nucleus of our parliament that was made in these Ottoman/European countries agreement, which was a parity where you have a small, we call it, it's not a parliament, but it's a communal, if you want, commission that had 12 members. 6 of them were Muslims, 6 of them were Christians, 2 Sunni, 2 Shia, and 2 Druze. On the other side, you had the Christian one with 2 Maronite, 2 Catholics, and 2 Orthodox. And this is, in a few words, what current Lebanon is. We have a country with 18 sects, 19, with regions that have a slight majority, sectarian majority, with other regions that are totally mixed. And there is always this struggle for becoming on top, for control, or at least struggle to make sure that you are still as a sect represented in the parliament and in the state as a whole. Why? Because in our region, being represented and having a share of power is not a matter of politics, it's a matter of survival. Any sect that lost its share of power didn't just become irrelevant, it was massacred. And again, I go back to a very recent example of the Azidians and the Ashurians in Iraq and in Syria. When a sect became on top, which is ISIS, a fundamentalist Sunni sect, the first thing they did is they started, of course, they are fundamentalist, extremists, and terrorists, but this has been the trend. And there are historical examples of that. As I told you, the 1860 civil war, where the Druze massacred the Christians. You have the 1858 that ended with the intervention of the US Marines. You can see them here debarking on the shores of Beirut to make sure that no further sectarian killings continue. You had the large civil war in 1975, which was caused, again, by a demographical change. The Maronite grew in power, and France practically created Lebanon for the Maronite, and they had all the top position. They had the president, which was a presidential system like in America. The prime minister had no powers. They had a 6-5 balance of power in the parliament. They had the head of the army, the head of the central bank, the head of the largest ministries. They practically control the whole country. But again, demography is a cruel mistress, and their numbers started dwindling while the numbers of the Muslims started growing up. And it took a war of 15 years from 1975 till 1990 in order just to change the balance of power in the parliament from 6-5 in favor of the Christian into a 6-6 parity between Christian and Muslims. And then we enter the post-Ta'if modern era, where it became even more of a consociational system, where the president became symbolic, and the prime minister had a bit more, who is a Sunni. But the Council of Ministers, which is again parity, had more powers, and the power of the president was diffused in the Council of Ministers. The parliament became a balanced parliament with parity between Muslims and Christians, and Lebanon was practically put under the control or tutelage of Syria. Fast forward to 2005, lots of grumbling. Lebanese wanted to get away, get their independence away from the Syrian control, and this is where the Syrian assassinated Prime Minister Rafil Hariri, and we had the Cedar Revolution, the earliest Arab revolution, and Lebanon became independent, but we are still here. We're still having sectarian strife, and now we are in a big economic crisis. Again, the demography has still been changing the face of Lebanon. We're now at 65% at least of Muslims for 35% Christians. There are calls for a rechange of the constitution and the balance of power, but for me, it's gonna take another civil war to do that. The pictures are, the first one is the 1860 Civil War. The other one is Marines debarking and debarking on the shores of Beirut. And the last one is the 1975 Civil War. For me, I can go on, but I would like to hear your questions, maybe, if you have any. Has there been any major change to the religious system? Okay. As a religious system, I don't know if you're talking about demography or are you talking about the power sharing system? The power sharing from the end of the Civil War has been the same, parity between Muslims and Christians. Concerning religious, it's still the same as in the Milli system of the Ottoman. Each religion has its own control of its own co-religious, so you get married. If you are Muslim at the sheikh, you get divorced at the sheikh. When you die, it's a sheikh who will pray for you. The same for the Christian. Unfortunately, for the young Lebanese who feel that they want to distance themselves from the sectarian leaders, from the religious figures, there is no civil marriage in Lebanon. They have to travel to Cyprus to get married in a civil way, and then they can come back, and the government accept their civil marriage, but you cannot get a civil marriage in Lebanon. Second question, do you think there are outside influences to increase the conflict of Lebanon? Again, if you remember in my when I spoke earlier, that Lebanon has always been, or the land that is now called Lebanon, has always been in the center of a region that is, you have two major powers, one in Mesopotamia, which is now Iraq/Iran, and one in Egypt. Even now, you have Syria and Israel, and they always has been trying to get more power, more influence over Lebanon. So yes, definitely. Nowadays, with America tightening the screws and increasing sanctions on Iran, we are feeling that here. And the Hezbollah, a proxy of Iran, a Lebanese proxy of Iran, is in Lebanon, and they act as a proxy of Iran, while other forces act more of allied to the US. And you feel that Lebanon at the moment is at the center of this tug of war between the US and Iran. And we hope some kind of deal might happen, or I don't know, something changes so Lebanon does not keep suffering from all these outside foreign power struggles that are reflected on Lebanon. There's a famous saying that I really like, which says, at any time there are clouds in the Middle East, it rains in Lebanon. And this has been true, unfortunately, for the past, 500 years, 2,000 years, I don't know. Do you think that, okay, we answered that. When we evaluate the developments in the Middle East, how can the countries here get rid of this vicious circle? this may be a management problem, democracy. How do you think Lebanon can prevent a civil war that you have predicted? And to be precise, I didn't predict a civil war. That's a kind of dangerous prediction to make. I said if the demographic change, we need to reflect that in the power sharing balance, then probably it will take a civil war. But if you ask me the solution, the young Lebanese that are now suffering from a devastating economic situation, that on top of that, we had endemic corruption that led to a revolution. People have been in the street for the past 3-4 months. On top of that, we had COVID-19. The country is in a very bad shape. And unfortunately, most of these young Lebanese who are modern, who are progressive, who are non-sectarian, who want to change their country to make it similar to all other developed countries, are losing hope. And for me, the only way forward is through these people, through the young Lebanese, empowering them. Startups, university. We have, I think I have the picture. In Lebanon, we have one of this is the map of Lebanon, modern Lebanon. You can see the mountains and you can see the nice shoreline. I wanted this picture. This is on top. This is the American University of Beirut. This is one of the most important universities in the Middle East. I think it's number 2 or number 1. It depends on what how you count it, and it's in the top 200 in the world. It is this university. It is the student that graduate from this and other universities that are the hope of Lebanon. If we empower them, and if they get in power and they get rid of the corruption, and they start sectarianizing the country. Look, it's a vicious circle. So you have corruption. So it's not based on merit. If you have a job, you need to go to your sectarian leader, and he will get you a job by wasta. Wasta is it's an Arabic, it's a Lebanese concept. It's nepotism / corruption / paying whoever needs you need to corrupt to pay. So the circle start with you getting a job, getting to your Za'im. You go to your father knows the Za'im. He will get you a job, and then the payoff is what? You have to vote the Za'im in the next election, and the vicious circle keeps on going. So if we can break it by changing the economic situation. If you have a growth, you have people who are privately owned companies that are usually not corrupt, and if they can get jobs for the young people, so you break them away from this vicious circle, and once they are out of it, then they will be able to vote to their heart content, and voting will become not based on what sect you are. It's going to be based on left or right ideology, as in a real political way. For me, this is the way out. It's building an economy that is outside of the control of the Zama and of the corruption. Okay, so we said that. Do you think that the fundamental problem of the broader Middle East is indeed bad governance, and other are just implications, including sectarian religious racial? Definitely. Look, governance, corruption, and I'm going to add also authoritarianism. These three, and they are definitely linked, and they keep feeding on each other. Fix that, start breaking this cycle, and you can start. You can try with authoritarianism, but this is a problem. We saw internal revolution, the Arab Spring, was successful only in Tunisia. partly successful in Lebanon in 2005. All other places, it led nowhere. So if you can't rid of the dictators, you are left with foreign intervention. We saw what happened in Iraq with American intervention. I'm not gonna generalize, but I don't think it's gonna work. So okay, we can't get rid of the dictators. What can we do? You are left with either work on the economy or work on the corruption. They are all linked. So I tend to go with working on, as you called it, governance, fighting corruption, trying to get out of that, uplifting the whole society from poverty into middle class. Then maybe you can have slight democratic reforms, which might lead into a slight change into democracy without going into revolution. Or even if you go into revolution with a strong middle class, you might get there. So I think the path of the least resistance in order to change the you just witnessed another problem of Lebanon is the very bad infrastructure. No electricity, internet cuts, and all that. If I missed any of the previous question, please repeat them. How do you think the government can boost the economy? Is there a way to verify the economy? Is there look, first let me make sure everybody can hear me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I always look at things. It's my ideology. I look at things from a liberal point of view, and for me, we've seen, especially in this region, a lot of government-led big projects, intervention, 5 years plans, and all of these different type of intervention, and most of them became mired in corruption. It became a catastrophe. For me, the best thing the Lebanese government can do now is unleash the potential of the Lebanese youth. How they could do that? First, by removing all the bureaucratic red tape and the thousand hoops one must go into in order to create a company or a startup, to take a loan from the bank or do anything. Focus on infrastructure, build a real internet infrastructure. In Lebanon, we still don't have 24 hours electricity. We have electricity maybe 45-50% of the time. So we have backup generators, roads, the basic stuff, and unleash Lebanese youth, and you will see the wonders they will do. Because all over the world, especially in the Gulf, in Africa, you have in all these big companies, you will see that most of their most brilliant people are Lebanese. In the top management, you will have 50% Lebanese. Again, another saying, the Lebanese do wonderfully well all over the world except in Lebanon. Lebanese politics and governance is the opposite. Okay, it's very interesting. The Lebanese culture is a mosaic and mostly known for its tolerance, whereas the Lebanese politics. It's an interesting observation. One of my thesis advisors were Dr. Theodor Hanf. He's a German scholar. He's very important in the power sharing and constitutional field. And he ran statistics and data collection during the war. And one of the things he found out was that the Lebanese people were less sectarian than their leaders. And this falls into what you are saying. Uh, Look, it's because it's a vicious circle. So, and that sectarian leader need to keep his people around him and supporting him. So he need to create sectarian tension. So he has a role to play, because the moment, and we've seen it in several periods, when the sectarian tension becomes lower, the state as an idea, as as a national feeling, people will start believing more in the state. So the better the economy is, the more stable the situation is, the more peaceful Lebanon is, the more people will be supporting the state. And the other way around. So the less stability we have, the less economic situation, the worse the economy is, the more people would go back to their sectarian roots. But probably that's why it is as it is. I think so. Is the Lebanese youth getting good education? Yes, as I told you, we have one of the best number of universities in Lebanon. Unfortunately, with the crumbling economy, and we had lots of foreign students who came to our best universities, which further enriched the universities and gave them financial means. This top-notch education, especially in the Middle East, is being threatened, and this is where another way that the West could help indirectly and away from the corruption of the government and the state is by helping the universities. And by the way, the U.S. State Department just gave a grant of $20 million to the top Lebanese American universities, to AUB and LEU, which just fall into what I just said. I want to show you a few more. Could the host please allow me to share my screen, please? Thank you. Okay, so as you can see, the first one is AUB, the second one is Beirut, and seen from the mountains. And we are one of the very few countries in the Middle East, North Africa, of course, that has the where people can ski. So, and we have another famous saying that we are one of maybe the only country in the world where you can ski and swim at the same time. In early spring, you can still ski, and the sea is warm enough to swim in. But again, years of mismanagement, of corruption, we have problems with pollution, our economy is crumbling, and we're squandering all this great geography and topography that we have. Anna, from my side, I finished. I would gladly answer any other questions that you have, or go into a discussion if anyone.
Mr. Jouhari, I have a question.
Yes.
So in the US, we often hear about Hezbollah in the context of conflict with Israel. Could you give
Yes.
us a better understanding of the force that Hezbollah plays in Lebanon itself?
Okay. Again, a little bit of history always kind of square the discussion and the explanation. I'm not going to get you back 2,000 years ago, but again, Lebanon has always been the battleground of its neighbors, whether it's Babylon and the Pharaohs, whether it is Israel and Syria, like in the 80s and the 90s. We were a battleground. So after the Palestinian, it, the Palestinian refugees were kicked out of Palestine, and then later, which later became Israel, they went to and stayed in Jordan. They started trying to build a fighting force in order to reclaim their country. The Jordanian refused to allow the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, to be active on their ground. And in this 1970, you had what we call the Black September, and the Palestinians were kicked out of Jordan and they came into Lebanon. This is where they started fighting Israel from Lebanon. And every time they attacked Israel, Israel would retaliate and attack Lebanon. And this ended in 1982 when Israel invaded most of Lebanon, arriving to Beirut. And they were able to kick out all not all the Palestinians, but their fighting force, the PLO, which left and went to Tunis. This created a void, and this void was filled by Hezbollah. At the time, the Khomeini and the Islamic revolution that happened in Iran was still early. It happened in 1978. So in these 4 years, it was started to grow, and they started helping Hezbollah to grow and become their direct proxy. And from that time until 2000, Hezbollah was directly fighting Israel, because until 2000, Israel was controlling a large part of southern Lebanon. If you can see the map, you can see on the south Sur, Tyre, and there is this small river. And if it goes up, so the whole region south of the river was practically under the occupation of Israel. And so Hezbollah was fighting Israel. In 2000, Israel withdrew. Hezbollah kept its arm. It was the only militia to keep its arm after the civil war. And they claimed that Israel was still occupying part of Lebanese land, which are very small part of Lebanon where there are border dispute on them. And Hezbollah kept attacking Israel. And this culminated in another war in 2006 when Israel again launched a large air campaign over Lebanon for 30 days with limited land incursion, again to dislodge Hezbollah like they dislodged the PLO. Israel failed in severely or in destroying or even diminishing the power of Hezbollah. And from 2006 and later, Hezbollah became a very important power broker in Lebanon. Represent the Shia community, and the Shia, they are part of the Muslim community. They have been growing demographically, which again falls into how important demography is. They are now around 30-35% alone of Lebanon is made out of Shia, approaching a full majority or a plurality even. And Hezbollah the power has been growing. Lately, starting 2012, 13, or 13 maybe, they started directly intervening in Syria in support of Bashar al-Assad regime against the rebels. And this also under the direct help and support of Iran, which allow them to have more weapons and equipment and better training for their soldiers. And now with the war kind of ending in Syria, Hezbollah is back in Lebanon. They are stronger than ever. With Prime Minister Hariri, former Prime Minister Hariri, withdrawing from the government. This government is practically shared between. It was supposed to be technocratic or made out of experts, but the party with most control is the party of the president, General Aoun. He's a Maronite Christian who is allied with Hezbollah, and behind the curtain, Hezbollah is pulling lots of strings of this government. So in order to better understand, the idea was if you want to get rid of Hezbollah or get rid of their weapon, because you can't get rid of them, they are part of they represent a large part of the Lebanese population. You need to stop their support and their weapon from the source, which is Iran. Um, and the idea was, if Lebanon's army and state, as like I told you, become strong, people would be more attached to the army and the state rather than to a militia. And the United States has been agreeing with this view, and they have been supporting LAF, the Lebanese Armed Forces, in the level of 250 million dollars a year. And for me, I truly believe that this is one of the best ways to diminish the power of Hezbollah, is by growing a real Lebanese non-sectarian progressive state, supported by a strong, again, progressive, with Western education and training army that is made out of all these young, enthusiastic, non-sectarian youth. And this is the only way. Unfortunately, there have been lots of talk recently in the States of removing or stopping the help to the LAF, which for me is a very dangerous step, because it will only enable Hezbollah to become stronger.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Would you all, since you mentioned the importance of Lebanese businessmen in the international community, would you also be able to give us your perspective on the current situation with Carl Gosen?
Uh, okay, so Carl Wilson is another example, like you said, of multilingual. Maybe I didn't mention that the Lebanese are usually, most Lebanese know at least two or three languages. In addition to Arabic, they know English, they know French, and some others, some more. For example, my children are taught two languages from kindergarten, and then three languages in elementary school. So with top-notch education, multilingual, and with this open cultural acceptance, the Lebanese excel wherever they are. Carlos Ghosn is another example. He's originally from Lebanon. I think he learned a bit in Lebanon, then immigrated to France during the war, and he became a very successful businessman. And he was able to get Nissan from the problem they had. Uh, the reasons, I'm not going to go into them. I think it was a power struggle between Renault and Nissan. Nevertheless, he used the ability that he had, his Lebanese passport, and he fled from Japan. And because Lebanon has no judicial agreement with Japan, so he is a Lebanese citizen living in his country. Geopolitically, it's a problem for us, because now Japan is the second largest contributor to the IMF. And as you know, Lebanon is in such a dear situation that we defaulted on our foreign debt, and we are now in discussion with the IMF to get a bailout, or to get the help, and we need to be in good terms with Japan.
Do you think the Lebanese government would be willing to extradite Gosen?
Uh, I would say another Lebanese saying: everything has a price. But I'm not in the government, and I don't speak on behalf of the government. And for me, maybe he's a Lebanese citizen, and we should make sure that all his rights are well protected. I don't know the guy personally, but I'm sure there's diplomatically we can all arrive to a good result without sacrificing a Lebanese citizen freedom and without angering Japan. I don't know, maybe we can ask Switzerland to host a trial in Switzerland, or ask the Japanese judges to come to Lebanon. I'm sure diplomatically 100 ways can be found that will work out to the benefit of everybody.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Another question is on the chat screen. You can see it.
Yes. Fighting corruption can, in theory, provide populist support to the cabinet. What about the realities in Lebanese daily life? Would it be feasible to implement? Definitely. If the current government start putting corrupt officials in jail, that will raise its support in the street. But again, we go back to the same quandary. Most of the people who form this government are close or are part of the same parties that are corrupt and that are stealing. So it's going to be hard to fight themselves. Uh, and the problem is there are let's say three parties who are now in the opposition. Prime Minister Hariri Future Movement, Lebanese forces Samir Jaja, which are Maronite. The first one was Sunni, and you have the Druze with Walid Jumblat. The problem is whenever you have usually in Lebanon, you have national unity government. So when you have an opposition and a majority and parties who are not in the government, usually when the party who are in the government want to fight corruption, they will start with the parties who are not in the government. So it becomes a witch hunt. That's not saying that these people are not corrupt, but you cannot attack people politically and only jail your political opponent. And this should fall back into the idea that I raised, that in Lebanon and in the Middle East, being in government is a matter of self-preservation. And it starts with putting your people in jail, and it ends with a genocide. And this is why you see whenever you have a majority minority government and people are in the opposition, the situation in Lebanon gets worse and the sectarian tensions start rising, especially that the parties who are not in government, they represent sects. So for example, the Sunni, who Prime Minister Hariri represent a majority of them, feel that they are outside of government, because although you have Sunnis in government, but these Sunni do not represent the majority. Okay, so it becomes even harder. It seems that a stable Lebanon will also affect the situation in the Middle East as well, definitely. Is the international community Okay, so on top of all of that, I also did not mention that Lebanon hosts 1.5 million Syrian refugees, in addition to 200,000 Palestinian refugees that came here 60 years ago. The international community does support Lebanon. It supports the host community, it supports the refugees, the Syrian refugee, and north of 1.5, $2 billion a year. Although the numbers should be around 3 or 4 billions, but that's what we are getting. That's if you want the direct aid. The international community has pledged to support Lebanon in last year in a conference called SAD, held in France, that pledged around $11 billion of aid to build the infrastructure that I told you about. Unfortunately, especially the current government is not doing the reform mandated by this conference in order to unlock the money. So yes, I would say that the international community is helping Lebanon, money and diplomatically, but unfortunately, we are not helping ourselves. We are not doing the basic reform that we should be doing. For example, I told you about the electricity. Lebanon pays every year between 1.5 to $2 billion in subsidies to make this electricity work. Although we have only 50% of electricity, and this represents at least 20% or more, 30% of our deficit. And this has been the case for the last 5 years. And for the last 2 years, I've been hearing that in order to get the electricity going in Lebanon, you need to appoint the board and the managing director of the EDL, the electricity company in Lebanon, the National Electricity Company. And you need to appoint an authoritarian, the controlling authority or controlling commission of the electricity. It's an intergovernmental commission. The two appointment has not been made yet for the past 3 years, although they are the requirement to start the SAD and unlocking the money. Why? Because this appointment will lessen the power, the controlling power of the energy minister. And the energy minister follows a certain political party, and this political party does not want to see its political power diminished. And this way, we are stuck in this endless loop where they say, okay, we need, the Lebanese say, we need money. The international community say, of course, we'll give you money. Start the reforms, and back to the Lebanese, okay, tomorrow, after tomorrow, and we're stuck in this loop. 2 years we've lost without doing anything. Refugees are also another problem that increases tension, definitely. Okay, thank you for your question. You are putting the finger on a very important point. Lebanon is a very small country with one of the highest density per capita. If you want, logistically, it's going to be very hard to integrate 1.5 million Syrian refugees. But this is not the major question why we cannot integrate them. We cannot integrate them because it goes back to what? The demographic balance. The majority, the large majority, 95% or 99%, 95, let's say, of these 1.5 million, they are now around 1.2. Some of them went back home. Million Syrian refugees are Sunnis. And if you integrate them, it means you're already skewed demographic balance. 65% Muslims to 35% Christian will become 80% Muslims to 20% Christian. And the Christian will definitely never allow this to happen. So the policies are, we keep them in non-permanent lodging. We give them whatever help we can, and the international community help them. They give them vouchers for food. They teach their children. They build them tents for minimal living condition. The idea is we hope that they can go back to Syria. But here we go back into another problem, because most of them are Sunnis, and most of the Sunnis, Syrian Sunnis, are against Bashar al-Assad. So Bashar al-Assad will not allow them to go back easily. And so we are stuck in on this loop. So now we're waiting for the end of the war. The war is practically ended, but Bashar al-Assad will not welcome 1.5 million people who were against him in the beginning and wanted their freedom and wanted democracy. So what can we do? I don't know. Some of them, in the last 2 years, 150,000 have returned to their country. We hope that the Russian Navy can pressure Bashar al-Assad to allow more to come back. Maybe if peace is fully started in Syria, we can hope that they will come back. Maybe if there is elections and democracy in Syria and it becomes, I'm just hoping now. No, that's not. We live in the Middle East. Hopes don't become reality, but maybe. Okay, terrorism. During the the height of the Syrian civil war and ISIS, when ISIS started, we had problems like most of the other countries in the world had problems. And there was at least, by the way, Lebanon was one of the least affected. We only had 400 Lebanese who went and joined Daesh. For example, in Tunis, they had around 6,000. The European countries, again, thousands of from France, from Belgium, went and joined Daesh. In Lebanon, we only had 400. We fought it by having a good connection and cooperation with Western intelligence agencies and police. Our police do LAF and the ISF, Internal Security Forces, and the Lebanese Armed Forces have a good connection with the West and with many other countries. This on one side. On the second side, again, the majority of Sunnis follow Prime Minister Hariri and former Prime Minister Hariri. Former Prime Minister Hariri is a moderate Sunni, and he has been playing a very important role in making sure that most of the Sunnis do not follow blindly the evil ideology of Daesh, ISIS. So it's two ways. Making sure that your people are still in the believing in moderation, and religion is a private issue. You deal with it inside your home. You do not force it on others. And on the other side, you use a strong, fair police force and the cooperation, international cooperation.
Mr. Jouhari, do you have any concerns over how climate change and resource issues will affect sectarian conflict in Lebanon?
That's a good question. And this is why I really like these seminars. It allows you to get out of the box where you are. Uh, I'm sorry, I didn't start my video. Okay. Look, um, we are in such a very bad economic crisis that it's very hard to look further down the line. But these problems have been happening, and they have been had an impact. Our weather have been a bit wonky, less snow. Some years we have too much snow. This has affected the livelihood of all the villages that live on the ski resorts. The ski season has been becoming less and less. It used to be 4 or 5 months. Now we're talking about 3 months. So this is increasing the level of people moving from their villages to the cities, increasing poverty in the cities. We are starting to suffer from water scarcity, although Lebanon is one of the countries in the Middle East with the most water resources. And so this will create, and with less resources, this will create even more tensions. Luckily, we haven't felt it yet. We felt it indirectly because with the pollution and one of our major rivers, let me show you the map of Lebanon. One of the major rivers, which you can see, is this little blue line that go into the Bekaa Valley and all over. I don't know if you can see it. We have a large dam here. This river is so polluted that it's almost toxic. There's nothing lives in it anymore. And so again, it created more poverty, which increases movement and immigration displacement from inside the country, from the periphery to the cities. And usually the displaced will be poor Sunni and poor Shia because they live in the agricultural land, which is further increasing tensions with city dwellers who are usually Christians and Orthodox. You see how it goes. So it's not directly direct, because on top of climate change, we have a large financial problem where we have a trade deficit and a budget deficit, and now we're having a currency devaluation. Our currency has lost. Yeah, it was at $1 used to get to net you 1,500 liras. Now it nets you, I think, 6,000. So divided by 4. So it is, and it will be a very important aspect, but we are practically blind to it with all the problems we have. So if any one of you is interested in that, I can put you in contact with the people who have the data, and you can do some research on that. But I don't know if any Lebanese are doing any research on that. Again, when you are drowning, it's hard to look what's coming behind the horizon and try to fix that while you are literally drowning.
Thank you.
Pleasure. How are the roles of Iran, Israel, and Turkey? So again, and that's why I started my presentation with that. Lebanon is always the place where all the big powers in the region fight, and you can see it now. Israel is fixated on not allowing Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies of having precision missiles that can hit Israel with precision, damaging its industry, its military, or whatever, or even its nuclear power plant. Iran is focusing on spreading its influence, spreading its ideology, its religious ideology. They believe in a certain kind of Shiism that is theocratic, where Khamenei, the holy leaders the holy leader in Iran, will hold direct control over the religious and political life of anybody who believes in that ideology. It's called Wilayat Faqih. It's practically a theocracy. So it wants to strengthen Hezbollah. It wants to keep Lebanon as a way to evade sanctions from the US, and a way to help itself ingrain itself in Syria and around Israel, to threaten Israel as a way to negotiate with America, while Turkey, after it was rebuffed from entering the European Union, it has turned to the Middle East, and it's trying to spread its influence. And in Lebanon, they have several NGOs that are working on developmental issues, and they have a large community of Lebanese from Turkish origin, and they are spreading their influence. For us, you have, I'm going to do some generalization here. They're not all, always right 100%, but if you get 100 a sample of 100 or 1,000, it's gonna work practically. So most of the Shiites like Iran and want to support its and adhere to its ideology, and want Iran to become stronger and have more influence in Lebanon, and by consequences Hezbollah having more influence. A part of the Sunni believe that Turkey is a good counterbalance to Iran. During civil war, there was a part of Christian who felt that Israel was the closest to them. At the moment, there is no feeling, neither in the Christian, or a large feeling, neither in the Christian or in any other part of the Lebanese, that Israel can play a positive role in Lebanon. We just want them to leave us alone and not bomb us to hell one more time.
I think that's all for the questions, Mr. Jouhari. Thank you for joining us and for this wonderful talk, and especially addressing not only the problems of the Lebanon, but also providing us an overall assessment of the Middle East as well. You'll draw a picture of the region for us, and we are honored by your contribution. Thank you very much.
The honor was all mine, my friend, and I am ready anytime for further cooperation. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you. It was wonderful for us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Bye bye.